And our first hearing is ATI? API. Okay, and who's doing that? All righty, well, let's go, gentlemen.
We don't have a microphone. I hope that's okay.
No. Why don't we have them sit there?
Counselor, should you go under?
Right, he can come see you.
If I can control the computer from
That's okay.
yeah, you're gonna have to give us a second while we.
Yeah. I would go under though. Not over.
Question.
Huh? I need to know who this is right here.
No,
Who is this?
Joe, what if we, is it easier if you guys go there and then they can, because you won't be able to see anyway.
Sure.
That's absolutely fine.
Just so you know, there is 20 grand in the council budget for technology upgrades in
And
the
it
chamber.
shouldn't be. No, and that's where you're wrong. Because that 20 grand should not come out the council budget because everybody in the city uses this chamber.
I just added the money to your budget. I didn't take it from your
So you
budget.
added 20 grand, why you didn't put it in IT?
Well, it's your chamber,
But everybody uses our chamber.
we can move it wherever you would like.
Okay.
Ezra,
Okay. No, he brought it up, so that's why. All righty.
All right. After some quick thinking on the councilor's part, we're ready to go. Good morning, everyone. I do believe this is the first budget hearing of the season, so cheers to that. My name is Nicolas Diaz. I am the Chief Innovation and Data Officer for the City of Syracuse, and also the Director of the Office of Accountability, Performance, and Innovation. Unlike last year, I am lucky enough to not be on my own today, so I have with me my Deputy Director, Connor, who will let introduce himself.
Good morning, councilors. Connor Muldoon, Deputy Chief Innovation and Data Officer for the City of Syracuse.
All right. So for our hearing today, we actually wanted to take you through a number of different items. Connor, if you can move the slides. We will start with our mission and structure. We wanted to highlight some of the projects that we've completed or started over the past 12 months. Wanted to highlight some of the recognitions and achievements we've achieved, as well as some of the partnerships that we brought to the city. We'll go over some details when it comes to budget and staffing, and of course, give you time at the end for questions. So, given that this is our first budget hearing with some of the new councilors and the fact that we haven't had the chance to interact, wanted to go over a very broad level explanation of our department, which started 6 or 7 years ago as a Bloomberg-funded innovation team and has since evolved in its mission and the role that we play in the city. When it comes to our vision, which is the more ambitious, high-level way that we look at our role, we strive to make the city of Syracuse more effective and equitable for residents by catalyzing city government to be more responsive, experimental, and informed by evidence. When it comes to our mission, which is how we achieve it, we provide design and data expertise and other innovative tools and methods to help departments approach problems in new ways, deliver novel solutions, measure and track progress, and be nimble in advancing present issues that affect Syracuse residents. Now, how do we put that into motion?
Great. Thank you. So we organize our office into three pillars of activity. The first being experimental and responsive government, the second being a responsible use of data for public impact, and the third being high-performing city government. The first one is largely driven by our innovation project portfolio. This is about 50% of our department's activities. These are the cross-department process management, change management, and data analysis projects that we take on to help city government operate more effectively. We'll provide some examples of what these types of projects are in a minute, but just an overview on sort of how we organize ourselves. We also work to help from a ground-up level, help city employees become more innovative in their day-to-day practices with finding efficiencies in how they conduct their daily business. Part of that is within our Innovation Academy. In the second column, responsible use of data for public impact. These are some of our ongoing programs. The first is our open data portal, where we provide data sets to the general public and other community members and researchers, making sure that that data is accessible and accurate for others to conduct their own work. The second bullet here is data infrastructure and governance, making sure that we have the right tools at our disposal, both within our department and across other city departments, to more accurately integrate and analyze how we do things. Part of that is our data warehouse, our Azure ecosystem. Number 3 here. Okay, keep going. All right, thank you. Number 3 is the Surveillance Tech Oversight Committee. So this, I believe, some of you participate in, but making sure, there we go. Do we need?
Yeah, you need to adjust, yeah.
Excellent. So this is making sure that as the city looks to take on new technologies, we're doing so in a way that is responsible, particularly given residents' privacy concerns. The fourth and final program within this column is the What Works Cities program, organized by Bloomberg Philanthropies. This is a national and international program that grades cities' efforts in holding us to high standards of data-driven governance. As we'll get into a bit more, we achieved a silver recognition last year, acknowledging that we were one of the top 24 or so cities in the country for how we incorporate data into our daily practices. The third column is high-performing city government. The first is a system of OKRs, objectives and key results, that are organized at the senior staff level portfolio, and we help them to set quarterly targets and ensure progress towards those targets over the course of the year. The second is a mayoral dashboard and key performance indicators, so taking efforts to use the data infrastructure and provide visibility to senior staff and the mayor and how departments are performing. And the third is ARPA performance management, so setting the framework for how we achieve the policy goals and priorities coming out of the ARPA investments. I'm going to turn it back over to Nico, and we're going to go through a couple of these individual programs and projects in a bit more detail.
Before Nico jumps on, can I ask you, you talked about the Bloomberg grant. Are you still working under the Bloomberg grant?
No, we had some remainder budget from the Bloomberg grant, which we've incorporated into our budget, but it's a really minimal percentage of that was remainder. All right, so I'm sure some of you are curious to get some of the details of the things that Connor mentioned, so I wanted to go over a little bit more detail in some of them. So starting with our surveillance technology working group, which we put into operation this year. As Connor mentioned, we want to become one of the better cities in the use of data, but we also want to make sure that we are governing that data responsibly. So at the combination of the mayor's executive order on police reform, as well as efforts to become more responsible when it comes to data, we put this year into operation our surveillance technology working group, which is made up both of internal city employees as well as external community representatives and experts. We've held over 22 working sessions. We have been reviewing and have issued recommendations on 7 specific technologies that departments are looking to implement, and we have received a high volume of comments and contributions to the public, because being public facing in these decisions is very important. I'll move on to the next one, which is our open data Syracuse, which is the maintenance of our open data portal, which is available online for everyone to access some of the data sets that are owned by the city. But it's not only the portal, it's also a program where community engagement is also very important. As you can see pictured here, one of our team members, Jason, participating in a hackathon with Syracuse University students, where they actually use some of the city's water and transit data to create some innovative applications. And that's what it's all about. It's about transparency. It's about promoting access to public data in order to spur innovation. So this year we've added 22 new data sets. We attended 2 large community events and are looking to doing more. When it comes to ARPA, the administration of Mayor Walsh asked us to be very involved from the beginning in the governance and administration of ARPA because he wanted to make sure that it was really data-driven and performance-driven as well. So we helped, obviously, in collaboration with the budget department, the finance department, the new mayor's director of strategic initiatives. We helped put together this framework for governing ARPA, and we've also worked on putting together this ARPA dashboard tool, which is available online and which gives week-to-week detailed data to residents on how the city is performing when it comes to ARPA, what things are being funded, how quick we're spending our money, all in the name of transparency and being very clear about what we expect to achieve. We're not only relaying financial information, we're also being transparent on what outputs each project expects, which is quite an innovative thing to do at this city government. And it has actually gotten some recognition from as a very comprehensive framework across city governments. So I encourage you all to take a look if you haven't. I'm going to turn it over to Connor now.
Just a few other projects in our portfolio. One of my personal favorites was the snow map. This is something that the city or our office has maintained for the past 4 or 5 years. In the beginning of this year, acknowledging some challenges with previous iterations, we put new sensor technology into the snow plows in DPW and partnered with Esri, a national leading geospatial analytics firm, to build out a new tool both for demonstrating to the public when plows had last gone on the road, when their roads were serviced, and also some performance management and fleet management tools for inside DPW. We just actually found out that we received an award from the organization. We're the top performing New York State public sector entity with GIS innovation as part of this tool. So I'm very excited about that one.
That was specifically for that program?
That was specifically for the snowplow tracking map, that's correct.
But not for the performance of the actual snow plowing, right?
The award was for the tool, that is correct, yes. Another program that we're working on supporting more from a cross-department collaboration perspective is supporting the land bank property seizure and transfer process. So the current process, as many of you are well aware, is a very complex coordination between law, NBD, finance, and assessments. We have seen the number of properties transmitted to the land bank decline a bit over time, owing to some root causes of software coordination across various departments. So we've conducted some deep dive department interviews to understand where those concerns are, and are putting forward some policy recommendations for working within the existing software and potentially finding new software to support those efforts, conducting some data analysis to ensure that the underlying data as it works across different systems is accurate and most useful to other departments, potentially looking at some staffing and other department coordination recommendations as well. And then one final one from my end is looking at the implementation of Syracuse City Line. The API team supported the transition from a previous version of the C-Click Fix tool into the current version today. This tool has required significant interdepartment coordination, particularly in the Department of Public Works and Parks, to ensure that as service requests are being made by residents, the work flows from the app to a centralized office and then out to departments work correctly. I'll turn it back over to Nico.
One of the big pain points for departments to achieve their missions over the past couple of years have been our personnel requisition process. So the Chief Administrative Officer, Frank Oliva, asked the API team to establish a project here to improve how we do personnel requisition in the city. Again, working collaboratively with digital services, budget, HR. We project managed this, both the implementation of a digital tool which we currently use, but also looking at the process more broadly and seeking process improvements wherever possible. We implemented over 20 process improvement and left the departments with a number of tools, and the digital tool has already seen a 68% reduction in processing time for department, as well as eliminating some of the lack of clarity in the system. Last project that we'll highlight for today is our ongoing initiative to improve the efficiency and equity in procurement. So we partnered with the Government Performance Lab at the Harvard Kennedy School, one of the leading entities when it comes to procurement reform in city government, looking at ways to introduce more equity and efficiency. One of the ways we do this is by leveraging a methodology called results-driven contracting, which means writing contracts in a way that is focused on outputs. We did that. We put together a working group to write a results-driven RFP for our broadband expansion, which is part of our ARPA investments and which will be put out in the next couple of weeks. On addition to that, we also looked at how to make it easier for vendors, especially minority and woman-owned businesses, to make business with the city. We surveyed over 104 vendors, most of which were smaller vendors local to the city, to identify said potential for improvement. In addition to that, this project led to us being able to secure additional funding. So we were fortunate to get the news a couple of weeks ago that we were selected for this procurement modernization cohort that Bloomberg Philanthropies has put together, and which has over 1.2 million in resources that will deploy over the next 2 years to improve both the process and the technology behind city procurement.
So let me ask you a question. When you talk about DocuSign,
Yes.
is that going to be available to us as well?
For personal requisition or for other purposes?
Well, basically, when we're not in the office and we have to have something signed, we need to be able to get a signature inserted in there as well.
Okay. We have worked very closely with our digital services team to implement this tool, and we are looking, more precisely, they are looking at ways to expand the tool beyond personal requisition. I would have to check with them, but I think it's a possible use case, but they have a clear roadmap of where are we expanding the tool next.
Okay, because I work for a not-for-profit and we use DocuSign,
That's great.
so.
Nicole, you're supposed to say yes.
Thank you, Councilor.
When you were talking about the following slide, the equity and requisitions, I guess I'm wondering, what particular equity are we hoping for, and have we seen any results so far? Or are you kind of still in the research phase?
I'd be happy to send you the full results of the survey that we conducted. It has a number of insights, but one of the things that some of the vendors identified was just publishing more information out there in a more timely fashion could be a positive change. Or reducing some of the timing and steps in the process, which I know it's not always easy to do, but those were some of the findings identified. In general, when it comes to procurement, I like to think there are two possible ways to introduce equity. One is equity of opportunity of the contracts that we're awarding, but also equity of outcomes, which means the services that we're providing, are they being targeted in an equitable way? We're looking at both for this upcoming collaboration.
Thanks.
Can you talk a little more about the broadband expansion? Is that just for City Hall operations or?
No, this is something that the Director of Strategic Initiatives, Jen Tift, is leading. What I can tell you is that the aim of that is to connect the community, the underserved community, when it comes to internet, to broadband. The RFP in particular is looking to connect at least 1,200 households that are not currently connected to the internet.
One more question. The open data portal, you mentioned that, I think you said Syracuse University has worked with that data and they're creating innovations, I think you said?
We participated in a hackathon, which, if you're not familiar with the concept, and I don't blame you, I didn't know too much about it until this year, is when you get together with a number of students and or whomever, really, like anyone that's interested into software development, and you work in a marathon fashion to create new tools. So we participated in a hackathon, and the idea is, not to have like a super finished product or application, it's just to like get some sort of prototype going. So in this hackathon, which I think lasted 2 days, they at the end they reward some of the best projects, and in this case, 2 of the projects that got recognition were projects that were using the city's data. So and the students that were leading those, they said that they wanted to continue developing those tools. But I think that just speaks to the nature of open data, where you're putting data out there not because you want to lead all the different projects that you can do out of the data, but you also want to leave it to the innovation of the community and other developers to tap into the potential for putting the data out there.
So how does the city actually benefit from that, or don't they? It's just like, here's our data, use it, makes things better out in the real world, but do we actually get a benefit from that? Like, does it help us with our, I'm confused.
That's quite all right. I can respond to that from a different perspective. So as we'll talk about in just a moment, we have a number of other partnerships with Syracuse University, both from their professional researchers and staff and also their students. One program that we support is the Syracuse University iSchool student consulting projects. And so we currently are running 3 different programs using city data that will result in tools specifically for the city. So looking at some scripts that clean addresses, looking at mapping some of our assets across city parks, and 1 or 2 other things like that. The hackathon and open data is a bit more of a let flowers bloom approach. So as we share this data from a good governance and transparency perspective, how can others potentially find insights and use that to share it even more broadly with others throughout our community?
Got it. Okay, glad to hear that, what you just explained, because it sounds like we are benefiting from this and the collaboration is successful for all parties.
Yes, very much so.
Thank you.
Great. So we'll keep going through here. Just 1 or 2 on some particular recognitions that our department helped to achieve for the city in the past year. As I mentioned earlier, we did receive a silver recognition in the What Works Cities program. So there are 3 levels of recognition, I believe, and we were the middle band there, although we're very close to achieving a gold level. So this is a year-long collaboration with Bloomberg Philanthropies and the What Works Cities subgroup out of that. Acknowledging that the city of Syracuse was one of the top 24 or so cities throughout the country, and I believe some international competitors as well, in using data to drive decision making. There's a 9 different practice areas that they look at how we're performing. We submit an application and work with them to make sure that we're accurately interpreting how we operate. Things like procurement reform is certainly one part of that, but performance management and other perspectives as well. So we were very excited to achieve a silver ranking this past year. We are again applying this year with the goal of achieving a gold recognition of that. And then finally, just a few mentions of how our department has helped to produce some positive media coverage for the city. This was just a trade publication from ARC News, the geospatial mapping technology that I had mentioned earlier regarding the snowplow map. This has a print publication of about 900,000 print copies and more, of course, digitally as well, but showing how our office has helped to produce some innovations that look kindly upon the city and help us to get more recognition for the achievements that we've made. I'm going to turn it back over to Nico. He's going to talk a little bit more about some of the partnerships that we have and some of the values of those partnerships that we bring to the city.
Yes, so sorry. We believe that we often go far when we tap into some external resources and partnerships, and we have been very fortunate to find some great partners to conduct some of the projects, which we wanted to highlight here. Don't want to go into too much detail, but did want to name a few of them, including ESRI, which Connor mentioned, for tapping into the velocity technology, which powers our snow map. We're partnering this year with the Institute of Politics at Harvard to bring in summer fellows. We are working with an organization called Ptolemy to get technical assistance for data infrastructure expansion. We are partnering with the Maxwell School at the XLab for doing some prototyping of artificial intelligence modeling. We are also getting or applying to get a 2-year graduate fellow from the City Leadership Initiative. We participated in the City Incubator program at the GovLab, which is at NYU. For advancing data innovations. I mentioned earlier the Government Performance Lab, both for the procurement technical assistance, which we got this year, but also for the summer, this is typo there, it's the 2-year cohort that I mentioned earlier. And in collaboration with other departments, working to put together the framework for this Microsoft Digital Alliance, which is a big partnership with not only Microsoft, but also Syracuse University, the county, and the city to advance the objectives of Syracuse Search. Final slide here, as Connor mentioned earlier, engaging students at the iConsult program at SU. And also finally wanted to mention Talon, which is also a partner of Microsoft as part of this DPI Data Platform in Third Grade program, also aimed at data infrastructure efforts. Here's just a summary of all of these different partnerships, and if you look at the valuation, it's over $2 million if you add it up of extra value being brought into the city through these different programs and technical assistance. And I'll turn it over to Connor for the final section of the presentation.
Thank you, Nico. So we are a small department. We are currently about 9-10 people and have grown over time. We started, as Nico mentioned, about 6 years ago as part of a Bloomberg-funded grant to help develop the I-Team. We have transitioned away from the city or from the Bloomberg fully funding our team to sharing some of that funding to being a fully funded city team. In terms of staffing, we have two folks in the leadership, Nico as the Chief Innovation and Data Officer and myself as the Deputy. Previously, our office was divided into two sides of our team, an innovation side and a data side. We used to have a Chief Innovation Officer and a Chief Data Officer. We've merged the titles and roles in an effort to try to bring both perspectives into the way that we tackle our programs and projects. We have currently 3 people with innovation in their title, an innovation designer, innovation project leader, and innovation program manager. They all help to manage some of our cross-department process mapping and coordination projects. On our data side, we have a data analyst who's been with us for a few years. We have a new member of our team, an ARPA data analyst, brought in specifically to help make sure that the performance of our ARPA investments are going well and that we're providing the evidence to report back to the federal government. We have a data engineer who's also fairly new to our team, helping to make sure that some of the pipes and connections between different data systems are working smoothly and allow us to get the insights into that data and how we're performing overall. We have a data program manager who's responsible for some of the programs that we mentioned earlier with the open data portal, the What Works Cities, and the surveillance tech. And we also have a performance and innovation specialist who has been part of our team over the past year in more of an intern capacity, and we're looking to bring on as a full member of our team following the completion of her PhD from Harvard this spring. So, as I mentioned before, just one I think just one final slide. So this were the three columns of how we divide our team: experimental and responsive government, responsible use of data for public impact, and high-performing city government. In terms of who is doing what, Nico and I help to oversee the many projects that currently fit within our innovation project portfolio. We currently have about 30 to 35 projects currently within that effort. Our innovation program manager helps to oversee our innovation academy, which helps other departments and city staff members find ways to make process improvements on a smaller scale. Over in the second column, open data portal, we have our data program manager leading that effort. Nico helps to oversee our data infrastructure and governance projects, particularly the development of our data warehouse as part of our Microsoft Azure ecosystem. He mentioned that data platform in 30 days program, which just recently kicked off, and that's leveraging some Microsoft, some consultants related to Microsoft as part of ensuring that the system that we create is puts us in the best place forward going forward to make from our infrastructure perspective. Nico also oversees the surveillance technology program, and our data program manager oversees the What Works Cities. I oversee some of our performance management programs, the objectives and key results program as part of the senior staff portfolios, and the mayoral dashboard and KPIs, and Nico oversees the ARPA performance management framework. Finally, a slide on our budget. So we are a small team. The majority of our budget is for the 9 or 10 salary positions. We had a delta of about $50,000 in this past year relative to what was projected in the previous budget. Most of that is due to vacancies, as we saw a bit of turnover in our team from 3 or 4 positions this year. This year over last year is about a 5% increase.
Quick question, you mentioned 2 positions. One was innovation program manager and the other was performance innovation specialist, but I don't see them listed on the personnel service details. Are they?
This page over here, or
I don't have it.
that's not a page. Let's see.
You just mentioned it in the last description.
No, it's in something else.
They're paid out of Syracuse, so they
Oh.
All the 415 lines are basically the SURA positions, and SURA has its own meeting, so you would see all the positions at that time. We kind of give you a list.
So those 2 positions are not part
So
of
when Connor talks about having 10 people and you look at his little sheet and the head count says 6, so there's 4 that are on SURA, which are that $299,000 in the 415 line. The 5415.
Did we used to get this in our book? Am I misremembering this? I feel like we had the professional services line in our book. Because otherwise, we're going to have to ask this every hearing, is what is that line for?
Okay. Well, I think the hearing is tomorrow, so we'll give you the list. It can be in the book or not. I kind of remember Mary Bossler always giving a hard sheet of paper with the SURA list, but however you want.
Okay.
So take the whole 299 is taken up by Syrah?
Yeah.
I have another question on this. So your 2 positions, which in our book, it's showing that they were vacant last year in the proposed budget. And I feel like that wasn't true and it wasn't there, and I just didn't know if that's throwing off. It's looking like we're adding 2 new positions that we're not.
Which are you looking at the page? This one here?
5, yeah.
This with the six staff positions here. Thanks.
Yeah.
7, correct. Yes, thank you. So depending on the timing of when this was produced, early April of last year. Yes, I believe both Sam and Adria had departed the city at the time. Maybe Sam had left, but Adria had
But
not.
we would have budgeted for their positions, right?
Maybe the budgeting may be able to provide an answer, but my guess would be that it's because before they were named Chief Innovation Officer and Chief Data Officer, and the positions were rebranded.
So that would speak to the division between the data and the innovation side, where we used to have a Chief Data Officer and a Chief Innovation Officer. We now have a...
I feel like Mary wants to say something.
Mary was saying that Adria and Sam in their respective titles were on the SURA line, not on the proper line, so they like showed up from this.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions on the budget or anything in general?
I was just curious, as you use, in past years, I've kind of talked to people in this department about the aspect of, you said, experimental projects and stuff. And so I'd be curious, one, what experimental things you're looking at the moment and how you draw the line. Experimental, you always have creative process, so
Yeah.
going into it, you don't know if it's going to be successful or not.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd be curious to hear from you guys how you decide how to balance that, trying new things, things that might not work, things that may work, with that, while trying to maximize your productivity. Because we realize with experimental, you go into it not knowing if it's going to work, but when do you cut the cord to say,
Yeah.
okay, this is not working, or
Let me start. I really appreciate the question because experimental can be like a very jargony term, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me start a little bit more philosophical, and then we'll get into like specific examples. I think one of the values that we want to bring as the API team is giving departments the opportunity for failure. And that's really important. If we're never willing to try new things, we're never going to improve, and trying new things sometimes comes with the possibility of failure. Yep. What's important to me is not only, of course, fail, we don't only want to fail, but that we learn from failure. And that comes from being clarity, with having clarity on what each project wants to achieve, having good ways to measure that success, and then at the end, being able to have the reflective capacity to say, okay, we tried this, it didn't work. Sometimes what happens in city government, and I've worked in many city governments, is that people just sweep it under the rug, or they act like they're being successful when they're really not being successful. And I think if we just bring it up in the open and just like say like, hey, like it's okay to try new things. With that said, for me, experimental doesn't mean like, oh, we're like doing all this like new quantum computing stuff. Sometimes it just means bringing in the creativity of the frontline employees. So whenever we engage in a project, we don't say like, hey, we have the solution here. Rather, what we say is like, you know your work best. Let's create a safe space where your employees can brainstorm on what's wrong with the process, and then let's work towards improving that. And we've done that with many of our projects. So when we were working on a personnel requisition project, for example, it's not like we said like, oh, like you should do these 20 process improvements. Rather, we sat down with the HR team and the budget team and say like, hey, let's look at our process from start to finish. Let's map it. And then like, let's see where you would start doing improvements. For our right-of-way projects, which we're working right now with the permits department, we're also bringing in some of the people that request the permits, right? And we're bringing them into the creative process as well. So that's also being experimental. With that said, we also have some more experimental can also mean looking for new technologies or new ways of doing things to test out how they could improve city efficiency. So right now we are doing some prototyping with sensor technology and using more sensor data to improve city operations. One obvious one is the snow map, but I'm going to speak more to this, but our land bank project where we're using motion sensors in land bank properties to see how that data could help them improve their safety and security. Connor, anything you want to add there?
No, I think that was a great sort of summary of how we approach things philosophically. With the land bank sensors in mind, that's coming from a NIPA grant from about 3 years ago or so, making sure that the underlying infrastructure actually is functional between the sensors that are placed in properties or other locations throughout the city, the gateways, which are placed in city assets, predominantly fire stations. Those basically act as large distance Wi-Fi routers, essentially, and then the underlying data engineering pipes to make sure that that data then flows into a dashboard that is actually functional for the on the ground usage. But in terms of your question, Councilor, in terms of what how do we pull the plug, or how do we know when things are working or not? With that sensor project in mind, we want to make sure that what we are focusing on are problems that are core to the operations of the city. We want to make sure that we are focusing our attention on solving the big problems, and not necessarily on things that, even if we were successful with a significant amount of effort, the ROI wouldn't be positive.
Right, right.
But you don't set policy. I mean, you get your policy ideas from the senior staff, correct?
We do not set policy. We help to bring a data-informed perspective to guide and steer that policy, but no, we work with multiple departments to help, at either the senior staff and the mayor's office level of which is the right direction forward.
You know, I don't, you threw me a little bit with the sensors as far as the land bank goes, because getting those tax delinquent, dilapidated properties into like the land bank, so the land bank can do something, will improve and stabilize neighborhoods. That's a simple elemental fact. And when you talked about the plowing, I think that really, because I know residents of, constituents of mine that call up and say, hey, you know what, I found out from the dashboard where they plow the streets. I'm wondering if, I think sometimes, and I think those two things are great, and I think you guys do a great job. Like, for instance, what about the police department? Have you ever done a study on the police department? It's our largest department, spends a lot of money, and, as far as like constituent complaints go, we get a lot of, I haven't seen a cop in 2 days. I haven't seen has that ever been broached? Because when you were talking about being a longtime city employee, I'm sure some of your ideas go over swimmingly with department heads. No, I want an answer, because I think, I think that's the type of stuff that you should be taking on.
Absolutely. There was a few comments there. In terms of the, which departments we work with, that's driven by a capacity and a prioritization, and department heads coming to us and saying, hey, we acknowledge, we have a problem. We'd like you to help us try to solve it. That's how we got into the land bank process improvement question, where Kristen, former corporate counsel, came to us and said, things aren't working as well as they could. How can you help? How can you look under the hood at the data and the way that we're doing things? Sorry?
I said many counselors were talking to Kristen.
Oh, yes,
about
absolutely.
that process.
Absolutely. Just respond to one of your other points about the snowplow map. One of our favorite things that happened this year is that a student reporter from Syracuse University came to Corey Driscoll and said, hey, my street didn't get plowed during this big snowstorm. What's happening here? We were able to get under the hood of our snowplow map and say, oh, we can see where at different times throughout the course of the event a snowplow was at the intersection and wanted to plow the street. I believe it was Ackerman over by the university. And there were illegally parked cars on both sides of the street. We were able to prove that with data, saying here are 3 or 4 times throughout the course of the event where a snowplow was at your intersection, wanted to provide city services, and we couldn't. And that was really impactful.
So how do you carry that through? Okay, you found that out.
Yep.
Now what happens?
So part of that is a communication about how we're delivering services. We can then take that sort of data and say, whether to a targeted community or to other locations throughout the city, hey, this is what happens when you park illegally. There are ramifications for your neighbors, and here's how many times it happened, and we want to do better, but we need your help.
That's
I
called,
like that world you live in.
okay, because that's called
Counselor
enforcement.
standpoint, who had a shovel, who was shoveling streets that weren't plowed because of the illegally parked cars, that's not a reasonable solution for us. A reasonable solution is, can we increase the fleet of our smaller trucks? Can we get some more parking enforcement to get cars towed and booted, and whatever needs to be done to actually do the enforcement? So I love all of your data, mining and everything, but to hear you say that it's not until the department heads come to you to say we need help, I just hear evidence-based data mining, and you should, I think, or maybe you are, identifying where in the city we could do better, red flags, and then go to those department heads and say, hey, we can help. Because, we're constantly approving hundreds of thousands of dollars for consultants to help us figure these things out, and I feel like we have this brain trust here that maybe we should be starting with you all, and maybe, are we starting with you all before we go?
Or maybe when you come before us next year, you could see action taken in that situation. Sent to the police department, they issued so many tickets, et cetera. They took the data you had and turned it into action. Because otherwise, you just
change behaviors in a positive way.
And then I want to go back to the GPS on the snow plows. So once the snow season is over, does that convert into the sanitation? Because the trucks convert. Does the GPS convert with it?
That would be a question for the fleet manager at DPW. I do believe that the majority of snow plows are used for summer construction and leaf pickup. So that the technology that's on those pieces of equipment can be used for those sorts of purposes as well. In terms of the sanitation trucks, I believe that there is a effort to help with, that they're currently,
I was just more interested in the conversion when you're done with the snow plows.
Oh, yes, so that equipment doesn't just sit there, during the, unfortunately, 6 months of the year when they are plowing snow. That equipment is used for other city actions within DPW, and so we could have those sorts of data insights as well for construction
But you
or leaf
don't
pickup.
as of yet.
This is a brand-new program. We just started it in November, so we would be very interested in working to get that information out to the public as well.
But you got an award though, so we already know that it's a fabulous thing, so we should just keep tagging the rest of our processes, right?
I think it would be beneficial to put more sensors in different pieces of equipment and tracking that performance both internally and communicating that performance externally.
I also wanted to add regarding Councillor Hogan's request that we work more closely with SPD. I just wanted to mention that we do have a number of different work streams with the police department, but obviously they're a very big department and they do a lot of stuff. So, and our capacity is limited, but just wanted to mention that we work very closely with them for our surveillance technology oversight, since a lot of the technologies being proposed are proposed by the police department. Our team, through our innovation project leader, Hannah, has also played a leading role in the implementation of the executive order on police reform, as well as our data analyst is working closely with SPD on a couple of data visualization projects around police oversight and compliance, as well as their ComStat reporting.
On the call, the man answering the phone is on a call. The next person that calls in gets a continually ringing sound, like the phone's ringing and nobody's answering. Because there's one line into the police department about dog control. That frustrates a lot of constituents. So maybe we can have a high-tech solution for that. You can jot that down. I told Deputy Chief Cecil about it about 3 months ago.
I had never called, but I'll take note of that.
Try it.
Never called.
Any other questions?
You know, this is very general, but in other expenses, I mean, you mentioned something in the storage and I missed it. In your operating and supplies expense, you go from almost $26,000 to a zero. That's a quite the leap. Aren't you gonna need these supplies or expenses?
1 second.
Okay, good. Just wondering if you were aware of that.
We'll have to look closer into this and get back to you.
On that same note, I have a question under professional services and how you define that. Are those consultants or?
Those are our SURA employees.
Oh, okay. I'm messing up all this.
Yeah.
And then in your travel, training, and development, every other year you have a quite a leap from approximately $2,000 to $30,000.
Yeah.
So
A big part of that was the pandemic and our inability to travel.
it's just that it every other year it happens. So I was
Yeah.
wondering if it was her.
Yeah, that's one of the disruptions.
Okay.
Yeah. It's weird.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, we'll close it out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much,
Appreciate
concerns.
it. Next one's IT at 11, so we got a couple minutes.